be easier. Oh. Meeting is being live streamed.
Are you? Okay. Mr. Chair, we're live.
Ready to go. Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting of the Princeton Public Utilities Work Study meeting to order. It is 1:03 or something on the 12th of November. Kathy, I assume you've got roll call all handled.
Yes, I do.
I'll move to the approval of this agenda. Is there any discussion at all about this? Entertain a motion to approve it.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion is carried. Number 3, the 2022 budget and fee schedule discussion will open with remarks from our general manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's nice to have this work session because we can spend a little bit more time kind of going through what staff has put together, as well as some ideas for things that we're looking at in terms of a 5-year capital plan, just so you know what items will be coming up in the near term to address the fees. This is really an opportunity to kind of just for staff to kind of go through and kind of explain what we're thinking. If there are questions and we don't know the answer right off the top of our heads, we're more than happy to go back and find those for you. What I've presented here is a little bit more than what we did last year. Every year we're getting we're adding a little bit more and more to make this easy for the commission. So you may have noticed that the 5-year capital plans are including more and more materials, and it's just a way for us to make sure that everything's being addressed in a timely manner. But with that, where I usually have started off with is just to mention what I simply call our LPs, our large projects, just to give you an idea of things that are maybe not something that we deal with on an annual basis, but items that are in the budget that are a larger ticket item that we are planning for in the next calendar year. So this is the 2022 LPs. The first one is in regards to a roof replacement. We have been having McDowell do roof inspections on all of our facilities for quite some time. They've been doing a really good job. They help us with some minor repairs to make sure that the roofs last as long as they should. Help address any problems that might arise early so they don't grow into bigger problems. McDowell has identified that roof 1 and 2, which, if I remember correctly, and Scott, help me if I'm incorrect, but this is mainly around the office buildings. I can't remember exactly which section it is, but I think it's the main office and kind of that southern part, that southern section, I think. But McDowell's been taking a look at that. They've identified that as a roof that has been at the end of its useful life, and they are recommending that both of those get replaced in 2022. Their estimated cost is $70,000. And again, for these large ticket items, I do want to point out that these are really placeholders. Obviously, when the time comes and we go out for bids, at that point it'll be brought to the commission for approval. But I wanted to put something in the budget just so we understood cash flows and made sure that our revenues and expenses lined up fairly well. So we did earmark $70,000 for a roof replacement. In addition, we included in the budget $10,000 for a network server upgrade. This is Mr. Bergman and CW have been working at making sure that our IT system is robust and reliable and secure from outside influences. We have a lot of aging IT equipment. We've been replacing some stuff over the last couple of years to make sure our workstations are up to par. There is still some work that we should do with the network servers, and an upgrade is necessary. And then at the same time, we'll be updating the operating systems for that as well. So that was estimated to be in the order of $10,000. So that is included in the budget. The third item is really some ongoing infrastructure capital improvements work that we've been doing for undergrounding. And we'll see, we do have, we have been, we did hire, I should say, DGR to do an electric system study for us this year. The proposal that we'll talk about at the formal meeting where we do motions and approvals is to set a work study for December 7th to go over those findings. And I did want to earmark some work for whether it's undergrounding or taking some initial steps for some of the DGR recommendations. I kept that a little loose, but I would like to allocate what you see as 30,000 in capital and then budgeted 50,000 as well. That also doubles too. I mean, if we get hit with a huge storm and have a lot of storm damage, obviously that's a tool that we can take money from as well. As part of the next phase after doing a system study and identifying potential improvements on the system, it is time again to look at doing a rate study. Those typically, I've seen them done in kind of the 5 to 7 year time frame. Last time we did one was in 2015. So for me, it's about time to relook at that and also use that to kind of look into the future to make sure that again our revenues balance with our expenses, and they will actually look at it by rate class. That rate study would include both electric and water. Well, and I guess if you guys wanted to do a sewer one at the same time. You guys haven't had any major.
Correct, we just proposed or provided big courtesy of keep information to the council on Tuesday about whether or not or how much revenue we can generate if we raised our rates either 25 cents or 50 cents over what they are now. So I haven't gotten any firm direction at this point from the council, but we'll see what they do in a couple weeks when we talk revenues.
So if there's an opportunity there to work together,
Yeah.
That's always a possibility too. So, but at least on the electric and water, I would like to, I would like to do a rate study to make sure that our rates are where they should be for our needs. Continuing on with the water AMI conversion, so we would, just like we had for this year, we would budget another $150,000 for that improvement. And then it would be, our hope is that we would finish off the water AMI late 2023, maybe early 2024. So we'll, so that's still an ongoing project. And as I mentioned in earlier meetings, we are continuing to move forward with our our wellhead plan, our wellhead protection plan. The implementation of that does require us as under part 2 to look at a contaminant study. We currently have an RFP out for that. My contacts at MDH and Minnesota Rural Water have suggested that budgeting about $20,000 for that effort would be appropriate. So I have that in the budget for next year as well. And then the 2 items that we have for the field staff is the field staff is in need of a back trailer. Scott can talk. Scott, if you just want to mention what the intent of that is for.
It's used for installing user fronts of smaller installs for locating, potholing undergrounds, verifying where they're at, using it for the water side for cleaning out curb stop or valve boxes, getting down to some stuff for repairs. With more and more underground going in, it's getting to be where you can't hardly put a shovel in without getting out and checking. And it's a great tool to have for finding that stuff, and then doing some smaller jobs where you got a trench between a bunch of stuff. We can a little bit bigger one. We can use it to not have to make as many trips and a little more efficient.
So we've included that for the commission's consideration. And then the last item is to replace the number 16 truck. And really, it's again, the 50 grand is a placeholder. As we look at our fleet vehicles, I am wanting to make sure that we're constantly investing in that fleet. I would rather do a little bit at a time than all of a sudden not do anything, and then in 5 years, also we have to replace a whole bunch at once.
What is 16?
Huh?
What is 16?
We number all the trucks, so number 16 is affectionately called Katrina, because it's rusting in areas that we've never seen rusted before, so I think it may have come from.
Is it a pickup truck or a boom truck or?
Pickup truck with a service body on
I'm sorry.
it. Pickup truck with the service body with the
Okay,
toolbox
sure,
on the
sure.
back of it.
So that is in there as a placeholder. To understand better how a lot of those fit in, this is where I have the 5-year plans for the commission, so that they can see both what we have done this year in 2021, as well as what's proposed in the budget for 2022, and then kind of how that fits in with our long-term plan. With electric, you can see that we finished up the AMI this year, did some system improvements, and we want to continue to make sure we're investing in the system over the full.
Keith, we have a question over here.
Pardon?
We have a question.
Before we get too far
Oh,
down the
yes,
rest
sir.
of the next page,
Yeah.
I was just gonna hit one at each time, decided to wait.
Oh,
With the roof replacement, my memory says we talked about that a year ago. And we actually waited to hold off on that. Has it been inspected since a year ago?
Yes, yeah, we inspect it each year, so it happens around
Okay.
springtime.
Do we have a percentage of change, or is it the same as last year, or what is, because something is budgeted doesn't necessarily mean we have to do it if there's other expenditures that come up. That's what's nice about a budget. I'm not saying yes or no, or do it or don't do it. But just being new last year, well, it's almost been 18 months now, but that's something that when we went through the budget, it was my first time. So I don't know how relevant that $70,000 is. That's just a question, statement, comment.
Yeah, I guess I don't remember having that in the budget.
Well, and that's what I don't know, what is budgeted here and what's being thrown in, because I don't like thrown in stuff. That's why we have a budget. So I don't, if it's not in the budget, I guess why didn't we put maintenance like that in the budget last year? Or did we just kind of kick it down the can?
If I can interject it, because I want just for a point of clarification. Last year, we decided not to put anything in, but since that time, as I understand it, McDowell has come over and done a new inspection. So even though this might not be in the budget, you're proposing that it be included in the budget
Okay,
for
yeah.
2022?
Well, let me back up on a couple things. I'm sorry, but I have to go back and look at my notes. My recollection is I did not have it in the budget for this year. McDowell's recommendation had, what I remember even prior year was that they were anticipating that by 2022, we would want to replace that roof. That's just what I remember. So
Yeah,
I
it
have
was
to-
talked about and it stuck in my head. So when I
Yeah.
saw it for the first time again, a bell just dinged and
Yeah. So, which is why I'm kind of putting, I want to make that 5-year plan more robust, so that
Sure.
these aren't new ideas to the commission. But no, we did not do any roof work this year. And McDowell's projection, given the age of our roofs and the condition that they find them in, that 1 and 2, it's time, was their recommendation. As far as what it means to be in the budget, and I think this might make more sense when we get to the end, unfortunately, but real quickly, there is in the budget what I consider more of our standard operating and administrative tasks, things that we do. If we, and we will allocate, after all that's said and done, then sometimes what we do is we'll allocate monies for more of our capital investments. And that money can be funded either through cash, through the budget, or it could come out of the CIF. But the idea is that those are capitalized over a long period of time. Roof is one of those things that we would capitalize and not take the full expense in the first year, but over the life of the measure. When I get to the end, you'll see that on both the water and electric, the second to last line item are capital expenditures from budget, and that's where this stuff is coming from. So there are times where I will assign it to a GL code that's in the budget because it makes sense, it fits in with kind of what our overall purpose is. And then there are other times where I kind of keep it separate, not necessarily, it gets assigned to an asset, which then Kathy depreciates over time. And so I refer to those in a different way, but that's why.
So ultimately, it should be in that depreciation that we see at the bottom of the page, but then it should be under the CIP instead of coming out of. I mean,
It could be,
I don't want to take out cash to pay for a roof that we're going to amortize over 15 years or 30 years or whatever the case is. It wouldn't be filed correctly.
Well, the way, yeah, and I guess this is where the commission can give me some direction. The way we have operated is the general manager's been given some latitude as to whether to fund it through cash or through the capital improvements fund. Capital improvements fund does have some restrictions that it has to be for a capital project. So you can't fund normal day-to-day operations out of that.
Right.
But you can use cash for whatever you want. So if there are times where we want to fund something because we have the excess cash and allow the SIF to continue to grow because we know we've got some major investments coming down the road, the general manager has been given the latitude to do that. Now, if the commission wants to put more bounds around that, then that's obviously under, that's at your discretion.
Anything that has the word capital would be long-term and shouldn't be, in my opinion, never used for a cash purchase or a cash repair because it is being deducted. So I don't know if going down the road, if that's just how, all of a sudden you have this cash here, and you have the right to do this.
Yeah.
It may not be proper accounting to
Okay.
take
So
$70,000 out of cash when it should be depreciated over X amount of years.
Well, whether you pay for it with cash or with capital improvements fund, you still depreciate it.
Of course,
Yeah,
but the difference you pay with cash, you're probably depreciating that year or that month or, that's usually right there because cash is gone.
I don't know. That's not how
Okay.
we've been doing it.
Not on a repair. It shouldn't be, on a repair, it should be depreciated in full that year.
Right, but if like, say we bought a pickup,
Then
we
it's,
pay cash for it, but we depreciate it out over 8, 10 years or whatever, however many years.
unless you use accelerated depreciation.
We use
Just so we're on the same page
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Okay.
So again, at least that's what we've been doing.
Okay.
Commissioner Schwartz, do you have any other questions on the large projects?
I don't like pop-up stuff and I don't know if this is pop-up stuff, but as business changes and ways about doing business changes, how do you foresee a $20,000 expenditure out of back trailer? Well, you don't, but is that something that, are we setting up a program to replace that in 5 years? Or do we just look at it and say that was, like we did with the skidster a year ago? That wasn't in the budget. We bought a skidster for what, $35,000. Just the way my mind works, I don't like those kind of surprises because that's what gets you.
Agreed, which is why we spend a lot of time working on that 5-year plan.
Yeah.
To give you more data.
Yeah.
And why
And I
I'm
know
trying-
it's coming,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
before we get too thick into the recipe, I just wanted to touch on these things.
Oh, absolutely. No, I completely agree. I did not enjoy having to come to the commission for that purchase when it should occur in this discussion.
Which, things like that, are you guys on a schedule for replacing things like skid steers and any other smaller, I guess I would consider that a smaller piece of equipment, but
We're working to try to get that rolling, so that's kind of what we've been working some time on that 5-year deal is to start coming up with a rotation, life cycle and stuff for, some things get used a lot, some, have a lot longer time.
right. Like
So,
a vacuum truck might last you 20 years.
you know,
Where a skid steer should probably trade it every 5 years or
Mhm.
something just to keep up with.
We, to date, we haven't had anything written down, which is what we're trying to do now, is just try to start putting that together.
But you understand.
you know, so that,
Yeah, certain things are might have for 20 years or longer, and certain things should be rotated through.
And, kind of what you're alluding to, I mean, you might get to that point and decide, hey, it's a good piece of equipment,
Yeah.
there's no,
The new ones aren't any better.
yeah, and then you can
Efficient.
take that money and make sure,
Yeah.
but make sure you invest it in whatever your least valued piece of equipment is, so that you're always maintaining
Yeah.
something that's reliable. That's the intent.
Yeah, I think some things they come out with, safer equipment, which would be one reason, or
I did have
more
more
efficient tools, or sometimes they outdate, like the skid steers, some of the attachments are outdated. You can't go rent attachments for your old skids. There's a few different scenarios.
I did have another question, excuse me. When it comes to the rate study, our last one was in 2015.
That's, yes,
Okay, and you like to see them every 5 and 7, so this would make it 6, so that's right in there. When it's 2019, did we have a 4% decrease?
yes.
Did we do a rate study then to do that decrease? No. Okay,
That came down from SIMPA, I believe, was really passed on. I mean, that's where it kind of
That's where it started.
initiated.
so that was just a house of cards that they did it and just trickled down to.
SIMPA did a 4% rate reduction, which is usually about, I want to say 2/3 to 3/4 of our cost of supplying electricity. However, what the commission decided at that time was to pass through a full 4% reduction. So it wasn't just the simple one, but then they shaved off some from our operating expenses. And then they also did a 4% on the water side, which obviously isn't related to SIMPA, but they did a 4% across the board. But a rate study was not done at that time.
So if we go back a couple of conversations, long-term, didn't we look at, talk about electricity costs going down to us? And now the world is changing in front of our eyes, where coal and inflation and everything else, but didn't we have that discussion that in a few years from last year, or whatever, that it was going to go down? That's what I recall.
Yeah, what you might be referring to is in 2030, SIMPA.
No, wasn't going that far off.
Okay, well, I remember having the conversation with the commission where we talked about as Sherco retires and as Rochester and Austin leave SIMPA and all of those bond payments for Sherco disappear, SIMPA is going to be flush with cash and could potentially anticipate a
Yeah,
major
that's-
rate reduction.
Which was 2030.
That's what it,
That's the discussion we had.
Yeah.
Right? But I mean, it's, barring coal shortages and gas shortages and everything else, our future, with SIMPA looks really good. But if you get it right, 2030 is, if that's what it's.
I'd like to come back to that point a little bit. Because, well, let me just address it, the note that you sent out regarding coal shortages, escalating costs for natural gas, coal shortages being an issue. In the middle of all that, one of the things that was mentioned at the SIMPA annual was that they had just renegotiated delivery of coal with a new company to help reduce costs of our coal inbound. So from now until 2030, there's hopefully some economy generated there. So we won't have, hopefully, won't have that spike of higher coal costs coming into us that would have to be passed along to us if we were in a pinch. And I think there are going to be utilities in this country that are feeling the pinch as gas prices go from 2 to 6 or 7 or whatever they're going to wind up at, which scares me a little bit, being an natural gas user, so, you know, what's gonna happen with our coal? I was very enheartened, I would say, to see that report, and then remember that Gershwin had said, well, we just renegotiated this, so we've got this program to deliver coal continuously as we need it with a new supplier. I can't remember BNSF or who it was, but nonetheless, that forward thinking has probably put us in a better position. If coal prices do go up, we're gonna be protected, hedged a little bit. And so,
Well, to that point, and this is more, I guess, for Michelle and Scott and Kathy, the audience. There is a lot of turmoil within the railroad industry at the moment. And obviously, the coal gets delivered to Chicago via rail. SIPA has had, because of the inability to get in the coal shipments that they would like to get, have had to lower the operating times of Chicago 3 to the bare minimums. And that is to maintain a coal pile through April. Because their biggest concern right now is they don't want to get to January, February and have nothing left to burn. BNSF, Burlington Northern, Santa Fe has notified not just SIPA, but a lot of other utilities that they are unable to find the crews necessary to run the trains to deliver the coal at their final locations. And so this is not just a SIPA problem, but it's a countrywide utility problem. They're feeling the labor shortage just like everybody else. And it has resulted in fewer trains operating, which means less tonnage being delivered. And that's what we're seeing right now.
So for Princeton, let's just say that all this scenario that perfect storm happens and natural gas, we have another natural gas incident like we had a few years back. We have to fire our engines. Like how long can we run? How much fuel can we get? Are we gonna run out of fuel?
We have,
Have we locked in? Are we prepared for something where we might have to run for days on end?
SIPA is usually the one that notifies the fuel oil companies, correct? Or am I remembering?
No, we are set up through a couple of different, I believe they have two different options that we can go through to get supply, to get loads in. Don't know the exact run time, but we have on storage, how many hours we can run, which all depends on load and how much we have going. But as far as exact run time, I don't know, but we got, I believe they have two fuel delivery companies set up to deliver in if we need.
So normally what happens is we start getting run orders like that. First thing we do is turn the engines on. The second thing we do is get on the phone with the fuel oil delivery companies and say, okay, we're starting to use this up. Can we schedule a delivery for 5 days from now? Or, you know, whatever the
2
schedule
days.
is. Yeah.
I asked
So
that question in the beginning also, so I'm obviously having a flashback here. Deja vu moment.
are you?
Yeah.
No, I'm just fine. Just want to confirm that it's not me going crazy and that it actually happened. I think the answer that I received from you that time, Keith, is that with the gas and fuel that we have on hand, that we could run a week. I mean, if we had to, that's not regenerating or rebuying. That's just the fuel that's sitting out there. Does that sound about right?
I think what I'm remembering 5 days, so a business
Yeah.
week. But yeah, so
I was
that's
just
what I
trying to
remember.
answer Dan's question on
Yeah.
how
I mean,
long.
that's not a lot. If we're looking at a possibility of running out of coal at Sherco in April, if there's a
Yeah.
deep freeze or something, you know.
Yeah, but
You know,
so I think these generators run for reliability reasons,
yeah,
not economic. If we get into a situation where Sherco can't run, what that does is basically put SIPA on the market. And you gotta ride that way. However, that is still probably gonna be more economical than running all of these old diesels, you know, so I guess I wouldn't feel comfortable predicting that we're gonna run for economic reasons.
okay.
Simple will ride the market. It's gonna be more than what it would be if they had
So they might buy out Florida.
Canada, anything within the MISO
Sure.
district. Uh, That has potential price shocks for all of Simba's customers down the road. But it's more likely that that's how they would address it than running local generation 24 hours a day.
I think you're kind of looking at an emergency kind of, I mean, at that point, costs just get it going.
Yeah.
So people aren't.
It's not freezing or something.
But then what you'd see at that point is a lot of those natural gas peaker plants would run a lot more, but then the price would be. That would,
I know it's off topic, but this just came up with that email from
yeah.
the other days.
Yeah, it's an important development within the industry that I thought the commission might find interesting to see. You kind of knew all the different things that are being talked about.
I was a little concerned after reading the notes, but now apparently what you're saying, the sky is not falling.
Well,
Shoot, okay, good.
as long as it stays warm this winter, we're fine.
Temperature's gonna have is gonna play a big role in that.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. Keith, you want to continue?
Yeah, so the first one is the electric. This one's a little sparser, simply because we are just kind of getting to the end of presenting a report from DGR on what our long-term system upgrade should entail, especially as it relates to the north sub, the plant sub, and the south sub. So I kept those blank more because they're unknowns at this point. I think our discussion next month will start to help us kind of fill that in. The only other things that I included, we did do a skid upgrade on the power plant side this year. We do have our warranty renewal that is about $100,000 every 5 years. This is for the number 7 engine. So we just did that in 2020, so that would come up again in 2025. And then for studies, we did the system study this year, and then a rate study, which is in the proposal for next year. And then after that, I could see as we start to develop this more and more, we probably should update our flash study too in a couple of years. Maybe a fuse coordination update. So there are some couple of things, but they're kind of ambiguous at the moment, so I didn't include that in this. But this gives us an opportunity to start getting our thoughts down so people can see where we're going. On the water side,
Can I ask a quick question before you go on? On who is an example, a large general? Who fits in that category?
in terms of you're on the summary sheets. I'm trying to think of the definitions. So obviously there's residential and then there's commercial industrial. On the commercial side, the small commercial are non-demand bill customers less than 25 kW. I'm looking at Kathy to make sure I say this right. Large general are from 25 kW to 1,000 kW. So that's pretty much, all of those bigger customers. Think airways. Okay, so they would be a large general.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Airway,
Oh, yes, okay.
they would be large general. Large power are those who get a peak that is 1,000 kW or more. That includes plastic products, the school and the hospital, if I remember correctly. So
Okay,
we have three.
just trying to get a picture of who
We have
these
three
guys
large,
are.
yeah, so we have 3 large power. So your small commercial, all your mom and pop kind of stores. Your large general or your larger commercial, small industrial, and then your large power or your large industrial. That's how I typically.
Okay, I'm good, thanks. I'm just trying to put faces to the names, I guess.
Yeah. Let's see. So that was the electric 5-year plan. On the water 5-year plan, again, you can see that we have AMI investments through 2023. We still have, I still have a placeholder in here for the 7th Avenue project. So I know Michelle is still working with the county to determine scope and timing and all those things. But I didn't want to lose that, so that's a placeholder. And then, just as we found when, if you recall, when we did the roundabout with Sherburne County down by the new Taco Bell there, we had to move a water main. All of that was on us, so, you know, if, it's always good to keep in mind that if there are some activities like that we might have to do some infrastructure work. For the water towers, we're really not anticipating too much. However, the north water tower is probably going to be looking at a repaint, a recoating in the 2027 to 2028 time frame. So I just wanted to kind of get that on folks' radar. For treatment plant 1 and treatment plant 2, really we have some money in there for some dehumidifiers to make sure that we're keeping that equipment operating. That was the only thing that we could think of off the top of our heads that we should probably stage in some replacements. And Scott, if I remember correctly, we have 3 dehumidifiers per plant.
3 in total.
3 in total,
Yep,
okay.
2 and 1 and
Okay, so then that one in 2028 would go away. I also wanted to point out that we continue to pay for the Minnesota Department of Health connection fee. That was something that we had started in 2020. So that is an expenditure that we continue to pay for our water customers. And then again, looking at the waters portion of the rate study, as well as the wellhead protection plan part 2 for next year. And I really wasn't anticipating anything else in terms of a major consultant fee or study fee in the 5-year time frame. Any questions on? Okay, moving on then, the third one is, and this is something that we started to build out more and more, is to really look at our major assets, which I'm using to refer to our building, grounds, fleet, and equipment. First section is the roofs, the building. McDowell does a really good job of putting together their kind of 5-year plan for what they think of in terms of the condition of our facilities. So I've included that here so the commission can see that. The first part are the replacements. So they're recommending. The roof 1 and roof 2 would be for approximately $70K. And then in 2023, we would actually be looking at roof 3. And then in 2024, roof 6. And then in 2025, roof 4. So I apologize for that. They're shifted a little bit in your packet. But all of the roofs are getting near the end of their life. And so this kind of stages that out over the next few years, along with the ongoing maintenance that we pay to have those inspected. The next section is looking at our fleets. So you can see a list of the trucks that we have, the year, the type that they are, when we would be looking at doing some potential replacements. You can see we've got a placeholder in for 16 for next year, potentially 18 in 2024. And then the dump truck is getting near the end of its life as well. So that's something that we might be looking at the end of the 5-year planning horizon. For construction, I don't have anything. We don't have anything planned at the moment. There are some things that we have discussed over the last couple of years. One is remodeling the office to redesign that, and then if we need to add in some additional storage, do a warehouse addition or something of that nature. Nothing planned for at the moment. Those are more just to make sure that we don't forget about those. And then we did try to identify major equipment. This is where we have things like the skid loader and the trencher or forklift, looking at maybe a chipper in 2023, and we have the back trailer here as T6 for this year. So again, these are things that we didn't have before in terms of a planning tool. So we wanted to just start getting some ideas written down so that the commission can kind of see where we're at with some of our equipment and make sure that we are keeping up the maintenance and making sure that it's reliable. Because last thing we want to do is when there's a storm or an outage, have a truck that won't start or something like that. That's not good for us either. So we just want to make sure we have something on paper that we can work towards. Any questions on major assets?
What kind of dump truck is that?
The 1 ton, 1 ton Chevy with the,
Oh, like a contract.
yeah, it's a little contractor box and it's got the chipper hood on it.
Yeah.
Behind the chipper and stuff.
The last 5-year plan, which is, this is what we had started with last year, and so this is what we've been building off of, is looking at the IT side, making sure that our servers are maintained and up to date, making sure that we're consistently improving our workstations to keep them up to speed, as well as the switches and tracking a lot of stuff in terms of our CW contract, in terms of our backup efforts, even our endpoint detection and response activities, cybersecurity issues, things of that nature, making sure our firewall is maintained, making sure that we're keeping up. So we're using the current version of Office as we interact with outside organizations. Making sure that our domains are relevant, are current, as well as any security certificates or anything of that nature. So this IT plan kind of goes through both the hardware and some of the software to make sure it's good. Yes, sir.
I noticed on here you have desktops being replaced.
Yes.
Last company I worked for never replaced a desktop for the last 13 years or so. All the desktops were replaced with laptops and additional monitors. You put a new desktop in, you have to put a graphics card if you're going to drive 2 monitors, or if you have a laptop, mine, yours, whoever, they come with graphics cards internal, so you could have 1, 2, or 3 monitors driven. And then in those cases where they're going to work from home or work from someplace else, they can pick it up and go work. And obviously a conversation you want to have with GW or whoever it is that some initiatives that we work with, as well as Greg, to think about how important, Kathy has a laptop in the center and a big screen because she has huge spreadsheets. She can have a monitor if she wants, but we're building in more flexibility, and from a price standpoint, I think it's probably 2 3s and a 6. In fact, I think probably some of the laptops are more economical than trying to build a tower to do something. It's just something I think that conversation ought to be had. Something you and Greg and your other techies and IT folks will talk about. But when we made the decision, it's like, oh yeah, let's just do this. Because so many of our office people were taking their computers home anyway, let's just do it. I don't know how that fits with everybody in your situation, but there's more horsepower in these little things that we carry around than the original desktops that I put together back in the Pleistocene. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, and we are evaluating the needs of each individual staff person as we move forward with, a lot of the field crew. All they need is a desktop, then that the device is here. Helps with some cybersecurity protection, knowing that there's not other devices out there logging into the system. So there are a lot of things that we're trying to evaluate, but absolutely, we always keep an eye on the price and make sure that we're supplying our staff with what they need for the work that they're doing.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on the IT?
No, I'm good on that.
All right, so again, that was more just to give kind of the commission an idea of where we are looking as staff looks into the near future, the kind of items that we're making sure are on our radar so that we are maintaining an effective organization with reliable equipment. The next two are high-level summaries for both the electric and water, because as you recall from our audits, we have two proprietary funds. And so each is looked at separately. And when I was putting this together this year, given the experience we had this year with the hot and dry summer and how our revenues really are kind of a function of things beyond our control. I was really, I was becoming less and less comfortable with giving the commission one number, but really felt more comfortable to say, I have a really high degree of certainty that we're going to be within this range. So I came up with kind of a projection of what our balance would look like if we had low revenues, and by low revenues, I simply used this year's estimated year end, and then came up with a high version, which really looked back to what was our revenues in 2018, because we do have an apartment building coming in online in the next year. We have Mike's Discount Foods with all of their refrigeration equipment and lighting that should be opening here pretty shortly, from what I've read.
The ribbon cutting is Monday.
Yeah, so that could be some significant load for us.
Same as the 21st Avenue.
Yes, the ribbon cutting is at sorry, didn't mean to jump in, but Mike's Discount Foods ribbon cutting is at 11 and the 21st Avenue groundbreaking is at 12:30.
So in looking at the numbers, if I just took this year's, I wasn't certain that I was really accounting for some of the growth that we know is coming in. But with the threats of inflation and everything else, who knows? We're so at the whims of those outside factors. But what I did is tried to come up with some ideas of where I thought the revenues could be. The expenses, they don't change from scenario to scenario, except for the production plant. And the reason the production plant changes is because if our revenues go up, it's because we're selling more, which means our simple bill goes up. And so I tried to tie those two together so that they made sense. So that's why you see increasing expenses under the production plant, simply because our purchase power costs go up as we sell more. Other than that, in the different scenarios, I kept the other expenses constant. I kept the non-operating revenue and expenses constant. Bond principal and the depreciation is just kind of a constant assumption there. And then the capital expenditures for budget, which is coming from those large projects, that number, that was just assumed to stay constant. So at the end, on balance, the estimate would be that our revenues would be slightly higher than expenses on the order of anywhere from 40,000 to 127,000. So I felt like, to me, that was a comfortable range, barring any major storms or any large failures that we can't anticipate. So if we do get hit with a storm, we still have a margin here to be able to handle that without having to dip too severely into a cash reserve or a capital improvements fund. That was my approach, at least. Okay. Any questions on the electric summary?
So on the expenses on the G&A,
Yeah.
for the 2022, you're forecasting 892.
Yep. And that is, here, let me look back at my notes. The reason that went up is, again, I put an extra 10,000 in the IT budget for the network server upgrade. That includes 30,000 for a rate study. I did adjust our energy efficiency rebates higher, but that has a corresponding increase in our revenues because SIPA pays for that, so it's a net neutral one. But I wanted the budget to better reflect what we've been experiencing, so I did increase the rebates that we issue, even though it doesn't cost us anything. Did increase the assumed expense for the auditor, because I'm assuming that whoever we get is not gonna be at the same price as what we've been paying historically. So that was estimated at 30K. And then as COVID's been diminishing, well, I guess it depends what article you read. I just read it, it's peaking again. But I am starting to replenish our training and travel budget. Because, so for example, in 2020, all of the SIPA meetings that I went to were all virtual, so there was no traveling expense with that. Now they're meeting in person again. So staff have been starting to travel for professional development as well as working with our colleagues. So I did bump up that budget a little bit. So that's why you're seeing that increase in the G&A.
And that is somewhat variable, potentially variable.
Yeah.
So.
I knew somebody was going to ask that question, so that's why I drew it down. Because it jumped out at me too.
Well, I mean, that could be the difference, that could be, a pretty good size difference on that. Respectable difference, not a huge difference. But
Yeah. Okay, and then unless there's any other questions on the electric, I'll move on to the water. Water, again, kind of the same thing. We see some fluctuation in the revenues depending upon weather, depending upon economic growth, things of that nature. Not as drastic, so you'll see a little bit less variability in it. The expenses, I kept constant across all three scenarios because we don't. For us, it just means that our pumps run a little bit more, which would have a minor increase in utilities, but I can't think that would be significant. And then continuing on with the non-operating revenue expenses and the bond principals and depreciation and the capital expenditures. So you see on the water side, it would, if you compare our revenues to our expenses, we would be running at a deficit anywhere from 120,000 to 61,000, and that's because of the AMI project, which was the intent when that was started. Was that's $150,000 coming out of cash, but we felt that there was no need to bond for the AMI project, that we had enough cash that we could handle a reduction on the cash reserves on that side of it. So we're continuing to buy down those cash reserves for that AMI project. And then once the AMI is done, the water department's going to be sitting really good for a while.
Because that's 2024.
The end of 2023, early 2024. Or at least I hope, let me put it this way. I hope by the end of 2023, we've at least purchased all of the components. If it takes us into 2024 to get them installed, we'll have just estimated in 2023.
Just labor would be really expensive.
So again, that was the thought in my approach on the water.
And that AMI under expenses, where would that fall?
That's under the capital expenditures for budget, your second to last line item.
Okay.
It's in that 164,400, and that's because 150 of that is AMI. A portion of that is back trailer, and a portion of that is for the roof replacement. So that's where some of that miscellaneous amounts come in.
And then you add depreciation in here, which is
Oh, in terms of, yeah, I can send you the one with the formula so you can see how I handle that. In terms of calculating the balance, I do,
Because
I do-
yeah,
I do have that
depreciation
back out
is really a cash outlay.
no, but you gotta include it in your income statement
Yeah,
and your balance sheet. And I wanted to make sure that these numbers all matched up with how our financing stuff is done, so everything checks. But in terms of determining what our balance is, I do net that depreciation out from the non-operating expense, because that's, the non-operating expense includes that depreciation. So then the reason I have the depreciation listed is so I can subtract that from my non-operating expense to figure out what my net non-operating expense is from a cash flow perspective. So that I can figure out what my balance is. At least that's.
yeah, I know. I mean, I know it's an accounting thing, but
Yeah,
if you're depreciating, subtracting 390,000 of depreciation, it's not 390,000 cash.
correct. But what happens is with the way our accounting system works is it counts depreciation as a non-operating expense. So that non-operating expense that you see in the summary sheet of $495,000 includes $390,000 of depreciation. So like you're saying, even though that's a non-operating expense, it's not an impact on your cash flow.
Right.
So I subtract the depreciation from the non-operating expense to find out what my true cash flow is
Right.
on the non-operating expense
Get your
to get my balance.
true cash position.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're. But the negative $61,000 on the high side of 2022 is subtracting that depreciation, not the cash.
No, it's just looking at the cash. The depreciation's been netted out.
So you balance that out.
So from a cash perspective, if everything worked the way that I am projecting it to work and we end up on the high side, our cash balance at the end of next year would be $61,000 less.
All right.
Just a quick question on
Yes,
the,
sir.
the two projects that are, two big projects that are going on in the city right now, the apartment complexes. that are going on. I know the guys are working on the water out there because I saw the trucks and stuff. Anyway, do we have water for the brewery plant or is that electrical?
We have both water and electric. And Scott, you were just out there, what, yesterday, today? So everything's moving forward on both, I think they're both hooked up now, right?
Yep.
Well, the back keys came back for the
Nope,
apartments.
the apartment stuff is all pretty well wrapped up. Our hydrants are lined up there, and then the brewery, we just got a little bit of testing left in there, but that's all plumbed in up into the building right now, so that can keep moving forward for them as they get their stuff ready inside.
As I drove by yesterday, the parking lots pretty much handled. A couple of our guys were over pounding things in the ground over by the
Routes, the transformer, they set that yesterday.
big pedestal out there. So it looks like there was some progress. I didn't know if we had talked about this, but did we get the water as well as the electricity on that side? The answer is yes.
Yes.
It's all good. Thanks for it.
Any other questions on the water side? Okay. Before I go into the fee schedule, is there any questions on the budget here? Is there anything that I haven't covered or any information that I haven't provided that the commission would like to see that we can work on to put together for pretty close? I haven't said it specifically, but I will. There's no assumed rate increase in it, so rates will stay pretty constant through next year.
Next year's we're budgeting for 8 stuff.
Correct.
Which if we were gonna do that, what did you say, Rick, 7 years, 6, 7 years, but
For what?
for the rate study?
Well,
I mean, I'm just thinking, trying to think about this 2030, it would be nice to, if we get time, you know,
Well-
the next forecast, to see if that stuff's gonna happen or not.
Yes, so
if it was 2015 when we did the last one, it'd be 7 years
Yeah.
this coming year.
So if we did it 22, maybe we'd wanna wait till 2030 to see what actually happened, you know,
right.
with
You know-
the debt going away.
Well, and what you typically see with rate studies is, it's not even just that, but, say we require a bunch of service territory, say, you know, say all of a sudden, plastic products doubles in size, or, you know,
Yeah,
if there's a major change, that 5 to 7 year time period kind of goes out the window, because you've changed the assumption so much that you probably should be looking.
Yeah.
That being said, if you have a utility that's not growing, where it's just inflationary adjustments, you can probably go 10, 15 years between rate studies. It all depends how your system is changing.
Yeah.
So,
I look at that too, and that's kind of getting to the point that I was alluding to. Are we gonna pay for a rate study if we can see into the future and see that we're really not going to have any major booms? Now, you've listed a couple. If we're gonna spend $35,000 for a rate study, do we really need to spend that money right now? I would be more interested in answering that question after we have our growth plates conversation next month, to see what that map looks like, and then be able to more closely guesstimate on what's happening in the future. To me, that would make more sense, because that's what we're trying to do, is guess what's gonna happen between now and 2030. I wouldn't personally spend money on a rate study now.
Well, I appreciate the comment, but, you know, we haven't spent the money yet, have we?
no, not at all.
Okay, so I think,
But it's being, it's
the
being
point that
budgeted.
he's
It's a good
making,
point, yeah, it's a good
the point
point.
that he's making is, maybe we should decide about that after we get the DGR, is that the right acronym? After we get the DGR report, might change the way we feel about doing the rate study. It might not,
Yeah,
but it's something we should take into consideration before we stamp that as
Yeah,
a
it's-
$35,000.
Yes, absolutely. If I may, just to reiterate what our process is in October, we present a proposal. We've been having this work study to make sure that you have all the information that you need. In November, we can discuss again, and this doesn't get approved until the December meeting, which is why I scheduled the DGR meeting for early December, so that you do have that information in front of you. So we're not approving a budget today, we're not approving it next week.
It's great to have that number out there, but I think the point that Rick made is about, we need to put that number in the context of what this other study is going to tell us. And I think that's an important thing to remember as we have more discussions before we stamp anything in December. We've got time to think about it, we've got time to get more information. It's a good point. That's been brought up.
yeah, that's a good, because I would think about it, this is how I think about it is, I think it's fine to leave it in the budget, but are we gonna get any more information than we already had by paying 20 grand for a rate study? You know, I mean, if things are looking forward, doesn't look like it's gonna change from looking back.
As far as we can see at this.
Yeah, you know, and I think we're,
Yeah.
you know, all of us, I don't know what they're gonna show us that we can't see already, or what are we blind to right now?
Yeah, I mean, to the point that Commissioner Force made, when we did the 4% reduction, we didn't do a rate study. That was across the board. And part of the rate study is, and COVID's really made this more complicated.
Yeah.
But part of the rate study isn't just to make sure in the aggregate that you're matching revenues and expenses. It's also to make sure that you're doing it by rate class, so that residents aren't subsidizing industrial or vice versa. And the reason why you want to do one every 5 to 7 years is because your load shape, the percentage of energy going to your residential class can change over time. Whether you become more manufacturing based or more service based, so all of a sudden your manufacturing goes down and your residential goes up. So you can, and we saw this during COVID. What we saw was energy consumption drop on the industrial side and increase on the residential side as more people stay. But that what that does is it messes up your revenue requirements by class. So will we get back to normal? You know, there's a lot of conversations about there will be won't, or there's going to be some sort of hybrid.
Yeah,
Part of the rate study is to look at those load shapes to make sure that there is no cross subsidization occurring. And given all of that, given the fact that we did this 4% across the board without looking at the load shapes, and you know, some other changes, shop will becoming vacant, becoming like discount foods, a brewery, which is going to have a significantly different water load profile than a storage facility. You know, a lot of those things really factor into that, and that's why it is good practice to do a rate study on a regular basis.
yeah, the load shape is probably something that's not in our, in our data that we have on a regular basis.
Yeah,
So the last one was done, what year? It was
2015.
2015. Is there any places that have closed since then, like Wesleyan, when they,
That's been longer. Yeah,
it's been longer than that. I mean, as far as industrial, I'm trying to think of anything.
I think it's important that we have this conversation.
Yeah.
That's really all I was after.
Yeah,
I get it, but the good,
yeah,
Well, and especially, you know, depending on how fast the industrial park. Now.
oh,
goes up
yeah,
too.
true,
I mean,
true.
that's all.
Okay.
Yeah, with DGR, we came up with an estimate, and this, we're just ballparking because we don't know. I could add another 1.5 megawatts of load. Okay, well, that's gonna be light industrial, large industrial, maybe some retail. Again, making sure that each rate class is covered.
have the folks at DGR had conversations with our colleagues at the city about the potential development out there to factor in that?
I provided them the information on that, and that was the number we came up with was 1,500 kW. Looking at other industrial parks, assuming, you know, certain square footages, things like that, they felt comfortable with 1,500 kW load as a starting assumption, and then we'll see.
Is there any information to help for that upcoming meeting that Michelle could share, but the amount of positives that could or add to that report of, well, if you're estimating this, and we already have it, or it's on the books to have it.
All I can say is that we are talking with 4 interested parties. I mean,
Okay. So that number
potentially, and
stays
Keith
consistent.
knows, I mean, Keith,
Okay,
you know, he's asked for some information from us, from one of our interested parties in terms of economic development things and rates and stuff like that. But at this point, we're really still in the discussion stage with everybody. We don't have any signed purchase agreements, but the 4 that are interested have been interested since the get-go. So I think they're waiting. They're waiting for us to firm up our timeline when the infrastructure is going in. And we're at the mercy of the federal government right now because we have a EDA grant that's being reviewed for half the infrastructure costs. So, which makes life, I mean, it's a
huge.
$2.6 million infrastructure project, and if we can get the federal government to pay for half of it, that makes everybody a lot happier.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're still gonna go through with it on regardless of the grant, whether or not we receive the grant, but I have to wait before I can turn my engineers loose on design and bidding, so we're hoping by the first of the year, we're hoping that in the next couple of weeks, we'll know one way or the other. So,
So if you wait for that grant, will it keep the cost down for the potential buyers?
no, so the cost of the land is the cost of the land. The city and EDA set a flat per acre cost, but we can still use, well, my preference is tax abatement as opposed to tax increment financing. I find it to be less cumbersome and a little more straightforward. It's, you know, your estimated improvement is X, we'll give you back X amount, and so we still have other economic development tools that we can assist potential persons in terms of getting projects up off the ground. So, but every case is going to be different. And there might be some that, I mean, the cost of the infrastructure isn't really going to impact the cost of the land. They're kind of two separate entities.
And in the 5-year plans that you have in front of you, they do not include any money for that infrastructure out of that business park yet. Myself, the city and the utility would be working together to figure out what our responsibility, what our portion of that would be, and how all that would work. So I think there's still a lot of questions, and we'll just have to work through it all together. So just so you know, it's not in there's not any numbers in here for that business park. So that, to me, that was just a big unknown. I just didn't know what to assume on both electric and water. Okay, otherwise I can go into the fee schedule. Really didn't make a lot of changes, a couple of tweaks that I'm recommending. The meter testing fee is something that hasn't been changed in a while. I did notice that Conexus charges a minimum of $65 for a meter testing fee. This is what happens for this, just so the commission knows, is every once in a while, we can have a customer complaint that is filed stating that they believe that their meter is wrong and want us to test it. I will tell you that in all my years working on the utility side, I've never seen a meter run fast. If anything, it's always run slow. So inevitably, meters, when we send them out to be tested, they almost always come back spot on. Well, and we just didn't want to have something where the customer was able to just request that without having any skin in the game. So a $65 minimum charge to test meters seemed reasonable to me. On the temporary connection charge, this is for new construction activities. We realized that, again, we haven't increased that in a while. I don't want to create a burden, but I felt we should increase that to $170. As a point of reference, Conexus is charging $330 for a temporary connection fee. I didn't want to go that high. Again, I love to try to promote some development, but wanted to cover a little bit more of our costs there. And then in terms of the electric connection charges for new services, both single phase underground plowing and 3-phase underground plowing. Again, we need to, unfortunately, we're seeing increased prices in cabling for all of equipment and product. I was put in here a proposal to increase the single phase to $850 per linear foot and the 3-phase to $1250 per linear foot. as a point of comparison, Conexus general rate is $8.75 per linear foot and $12.75 per linear foot. So that still keeps us under the Conexus rate there. Otherwise, I kept a lot of the other stuff the same. On the water side, the only thing I looked at as potentially needing an update is the private fire hydrant maintenance fee. It's been sitting at 50 for a very long time, so I was just looking at bumping that up to 55. And actually, Kathy, I'm gonna put you on the spot for a second. Do you know how many customers we have that pay a private maintenance fee on hydrants off the top?
No,
We might not.
I don't know anybody that is.
I'm not sure if we have done it. So this is just to make sure that we're keeping that up to speed, but Scott and I were talking about this morning. It's something that I want to look into as well. But for folks, so folks understand what that means is if somebody puts in a hydrant that's not in a utility easement in a right of way for where we can get to where it's on private property. We do require a maintenance fee because oftentimes it's on the, and Scott, correct me if I say this wrong in any way, but it's usually on the service line going to the building, which means it's on our side of the meter. So we want to be a little careful. It could be on the other side, depending upon where the hydrant's at. I think Silva might have one or something out there. I can't remember where there is that in terms of their overall.
They have one, yeah,
quality.
one right by the building there. I don't know how that one's laid out.
Right, so there are a couple of things like that we want to think about. The biggest issue is, we have, historically, we found that if we don't maintain it, then nobody maintains it, and then if it leaks, it impacts our costs, not the customer's costs, so that's why we encouraging the
Yeah,
maintenance fee.
it's interesting that this one comes up because I had a circle on this. First of all, I didn't, what the heck is a private fire hydrant? I don't know what that means. Because I've never seen one. Do they exist out there, private fire hydrant?
Yeah, didn't we think that the school had one?
And haven't dug into this yet. I believe more of they're not on the right of ways. Way back in your lot, on a business lot per se, or wrapping around the schools where it's not a road. I'm not 100% if that's the ones that are categorized into that.
Okay, so yes, they exist. That's really the answer I wanted, but the problem I had with this is what you have, it was 50, now you've raised it to 55, which I think is silly, but what's the shop rate that we operate on?
The shop rate.
If we, you have that down here someplace, the charges
I
for
mean, just the labor?
labor.
For office staff, it's 55, administrative, it's 85, and for utility staff, it's 75.
75.
Yeah, so for a hydrant maintenance, it's really at least once, probably, I think twice a year, it's to go out, like when we do our flushings. Make sure that all the parts are in working order, make sure it's not leaking.
And I believe that if there's I'm not 100%, I believe there was a maintenance issue or needed to rebuild. I think that went back to them.
Go back to the customer.
Because the
It's a
customer,
private-
that was more the annual inspection.
Yeah.
And the flushing time to make sure that line stayed clean and in working order.
I guess my point is that we're selling ourselves pretty cheap on this when we're sending out one or two guys and a crew do this maintenance, whether it takes an hour or it takes 10 minutes, we've sent the crew out to do this. And, you know, if you get an oil change and the book says it's a 75 or it's a 1 hour job, then you get charged for an hour's worth of labor, whether it took them 10 minutes or an hour. This is our shop rate for engaging our staff. And now we're sending the crew out to do these private hydrant maintenance things, really pretty cheap. And I don't know why would we do that? I mean, our standard shop expense is X. Why wouldn't we be charging that?
I think our thought is when we do the hydrant maintenance, it's not that we're sending a crew out from here to go do that one hydrant and come back. It's really part of their spring and fall routines. So we're out doing our hydrants, And so we'll just include these privates at the same time to make sure the whole system is correct. So I'm not sure what the true time cost is for that, but since we're kind of out there
Are
anyway.
you suggesting it should at least be 1 hour?
Well,
Equal to that 75 instead of 55?
if we're making,
I think that's what.
here's what I'm saying, is if we're making a service call to a private residence, business, X, Y, or Z, then that service call should be booked as a service call. Regardless of how we work it into the deal, however we want to manipulate it, we're making a service call to a private individual. It's not the city's fire hydrants down the street. Well, this is, although we can talk about that one later, I suppose too, but we're making a service call to a private, and I'm gonna use residential because that's all I can think of, it. The private residential thing to maintain their hydrant for whatever it's used for. So if we're making a service call, it should be based on what's the cost for a service call. And so you've got a service call down here at one price, and this particular service call is another price. And I'm just trying to understand why we would do that.
My guess is because, one, if you have a private hydrant onto the system, you're required to pay this. So it's not a choice on the customers.
Yeah,
I mean, they chose how to design the system, but, so it was to, I think they were just probably trying to get something, but not make it too onerous. I don't know.
But
I see your point.
Your words were, my guess is, and my guess is it's a handbook thing. Why do you cuff the shank off the hand? Because that's the way it fit in the pan. It's the way we did it forever and a day. I'm sure Kathy, who's been here.
You and I approved it last year.
I know, and I hate that one. I hate that one. I said it's okay. I think it's something we ought to think about.
We can change it.
It's just something I think we ought to think about because this is one instance. And then I think there's other instances that are going to come up. What we're going to do. What do we charge for this service now? Well, we only charge 55 for this service call. Why are we charging 75 for that service call? I think we ought to be consistent. It's just something, if we're doing this as part of something else, I guess we can justify doing anything we want. I just think that if we have service calls, then we shouldn't have $50 service calls and 55 service calls and 75 service calls and 80 service calls. What do we charge for a service call? If it's an electric service call, we send Jeremy 3 trucks and 2 guys and whatever we have to get out there, then that's kind of a service call. If it's a water service call where we go over and turn on a guy's faucet, or we check his toilet, or we do all these things. If it's a service call, it's a service call. I just think we ought to plug that in.
Okay.
And,
It was $3.50 at the HTV appliance in the 70s.
So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yep.
And, let me see if I had any more circles on that page.
I think our fee schedule, if you don't mind me stating, I think Bob in his public works section of the fee schedule has like equipment plus staff fees. I'll make a note to look at that, and if there's something that might be helpful to you, I'll send it over.
Absolutely appreciate it.
Right, because that very costs quite a bit.
It's, so I guess you could use that meter tampering fee. Meter tampering fee.
Yeah, which happens.
I don't know what that, see, what we all tamper with people's meters, but
Trying to slow it down.
Probably
It's-
not our staff, it's probably somebody
Right.
else.
It's somebody breaking into a meter if it runs incorrectly and steal electricity. God. So to give you a quick story as an example that I remember hearing about. This was back when we were doing not here, somewhere, they were still doing manual reads. And they would always do their manual read on like the second Monday of the month. Okay? Small town, everybody knew that. Well, something happened and they decided, for whatever reason, they either read it that Wednesday or the Wednesday before. They did it off cycle. Meter reader's walking down the alley, he's writing the numbers down on the meter. He's at a house and he hears the air conditioner kick on and the meter doesn't.
and the meter what?
Meter doesn't change. So they do an investigation, they find out, this is the old meters, I'm saying this for the audience, this won't work on our new ones. But the guy had drilled a hole in his wall into the back of the meter. And there was a little button or lever or whatever. He took a clothes hanger and he put it in there and he could turn the meter on. So the electricity would bypass everything, and he wouldn't have to pay for it. But he knew that utility read on the second Monday of the month. So what he would do is that Sunday night, he'd take the coat hanger out, he'd let the meter run for a day while they're reading it. And then Tuesday morning, he'd put it back in, and the rest of the month, he wouldn't be charged for anything. But because they read off cycle, he got caught and then was charged and was convicted of theft. There's examples of things like that, of people trying, this is why you see little meter locks on our stuff, so that we know if somebody's breaking in to try to manipulate the readings to not pay for the fees. So the meter tampering fee is somebody who has broken into our equipment, who has modified or tried to, and it's a penalty. It's for doing that. Plus, there'll be, it will be submitted to the local police department.
But the reason why I circled it was, if this is a service call, why is it just the same rate as a service call? So,
Yeah.
we can settle on what it needs to be, but again, I'll go back to consistency across the board. If we're sending staff out, what do we charge?
Yeah, meter tampering fee is something you see when there is a situation where we're concerned that there is theft going on.
The other one I circled was the temporary connection fee going from 140 to 170. Even though Connexus is at 330, we don't have to match Connexus. I think we need to cover our behinds, make sure we're getting cost coverage for putting in a temporary service. It's a lot of work. I'm assuming this is just an electric thing, you gotta run in, you know, underground, maybe they gotta do whatever. We need to make sure.
Yeah, we could definitely run the numbers. I think if we took the perspective on that one in particular of covering our costs, I think it would create a big burden for those who are trying to build some businesses, do some development work. I think having something in there is good so that people are saying, oh yeah, put a connection here, put a connection there. You know, we want to try to regulate it a little bit. But if we really, I think it's one of those things where it's okay to say, hey, by putting in a temporary connection, we're helping somebody develop some land, which are going to be customers of ours for years to come. We don't mind taking helping facilitate on the front end because we know we're going to pick it up on the back end. So, I mean, there are some questions like that.
Right. Well, it's suggesting there's some thought that goes into that. I'm comfortable with us not trying to gouge anybody, but I do want to have some thought. So anything else on the fee structure?
It's all that
Does anybody else would like?
That is everything that I have. Like I said, every year I try to bring in a little bit more so the commission has all the knowledge that it needs as we move forward. If there are, as you're working through it and you reflect on today's conversation, if there are questions that come up in more details you want, let me know. I mean,
We'll be looking at this next week.
no, not to approve. It's still, again, have this conversation. We had this conversation today. Again, have it at a regular meeting. So if the public is watching and they have questions,
So,
whether they want to call me, whether they want to call you folks, I always think it's good, especially on something this important, to give it a couple of months. Let people, if they want to take time to take a look at it and want to make some suggestions, great. Otherwise, it will be on the agenda at the December meeting for final.
well, I mean, if we're talking about good discussion for public to comment, I think, you know, we should also talk about what we've been talking about the last, how many meetings, is that which is the convenience fee, or what did we figure, was it gonna be talking about like $2.40 per transaction? Is that what we would kind of figure it costs?
That should be on the agenda automatically, but that's where we left it.
But I mean, that would be in this fee structure. In these,
It would,
is this where it would be included if we did do something like that? Correct. So I guess I just want to maybe state that is to the public audience, if there anybody else that's watching is concerned, to address that. So any ideas or thoughts or whatever, that might be something else that we could be looking at. Finalize the fee structure. So I think that's what my notes say. We said we were talking
Follow the pennies, it was $2.40.
$2.40, yeah.
So, yeah,
Is that,
should we have that on that feed or recommend to look at that with that included on that feed for next week?
Sure.
Should be if we're
Yeah.
considering it.
Yeah. Approve or not approve.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
I think that's kind of what
we're not voting next week, we're still, but
Yeah.
it should be there. It
Yeah,
should
because I would like, if I
it should
should
be, let me be clear for myself as well as for the record. So next week is our monthly Public Utilities Commission meeting, where this budget will be presented for discussion and
Next week or?
amendment.
Next week.
Oh, did you move it?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, same for December. So
Okay.
So that at that time, we'll have discussion. This will be brought up. It's going to be $2.42, or it's going to be nothing. We're going to have that discussion and formalize that. And then that will be fine tuned and brought to the December meeting for approval as a final budget for the year. Yes, no, maybe?
Let me say this. Generally, I guess the way I kind of look at this process is in October, and for this conversation here today, in the work study session, what you're seeing is what staff is. So then the November meeting is for you guys to take what staff has presented and say, is that good enough? Or are there changes that you as a body want to recommend? And then at that point, you can make a recommendation and we'll update these however you want. And then that gives the public the opportunity to kind of see, okay, here's the latest iteration, and then go for it in December. So I guess the way I would approach this is this continues to be staff's recommendation. It'll be in the packets that way, but as at the public meeting, whatever the commission decides, the direction they want to go, I can then make those changes into these documents, so that what we're bringing to the December meeting is what the commission thinks is going to be the final, pending you hear something from the public that makes you want to reevaluate. So that way it's very clear as to each step and how we're doing.
So this is background information for us. We're going to have more discussion, staff, everything else next week. We'll leave some time for public stuff, but the final, here's the budget, will be the December meeting. Right, that's when we'll have our final imprimatur there, let's say.
But if there are, I would just recommend from a transparency perspective, that if there are changes to what the staff has proposed, that the commission wants to do, it would be good to talk about that at next week's meeting, to make the motions to move that forward, so that what is presented in the packets for the December meeting is the proposed final version. Again, you guys always have the freedom to change your minds, but that way it's very clear to all parties involved and anybody that's watching.
Yeah, I'd like to telegraph the.
Right, but
What we're thinking.
what our process is.
For anybody who hasn't been watching the last 6 months or year, whatever we've been talking about.
So what I'm understanding you say, and it doesn't matter how you wrap it, but if somebody called with disagreement with it as is,
Yeah,
that as it is right now, the commission doesn't have a leg in the race. It's you guys that came up with that. So if we got a question on this right now, we'd have to say, staff, you answer that question because it's not us. That's why I don't like the way you're wording it. Because this is all staff recommendation, not commission based.
the staff is making recommendations to us.
Yeah, but if somebody sees that right now and they say, well, I don't like that, well, why are you calling me? It's the staff that did it.
No.
That's how I heard Pete say it.
Yeah, but that, I didn't hear that. I'm hearing, these are the staff recommendations. We make this change, the staff doesn't like it. We are still having a meeting next week and we could say, yeah, you know what, I know the staff doesn't like it, but we're gonna do it anyway.
Yeah, I think
We still have the final say. All the way through December, whatever it is. You know, we get to say, here's the final thing. We have even December to make an adjustment.
yeah, if the $2.40 goes on there right this second, right now,
Yeah,
or next week, to me, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's fine. It's not going to hold anything back. It's not gonna increase anything. It's semantics to me.
yeah, but it's also irrelevant. It's not gonna make any, put it on there or not put it on.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll make the decision when that comes up. I'm sure we'll have a discussion next week.
My point is, for bringing it up today was to make sure that it gets put out there that this is what we're talking about again, that we're talking about convenience fee.
Right.
So, and the $2.40 is what I have in my notes that we had kind of, come up with for a number roughly.
The language of the motions.
Yeah, right. So,
Anything else? Staff notes. In that case, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
I'll second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion is carried. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.